In her article, State of the States, November 2024, Efforts to Expand Access to Doula Care in Medicaid and Private Insurance, Amy Chen explains. As 2024 draws to a close, a slim majority of states, 27 total plus Washington, D.C., have either already implemented or are in the process of implementing Medicaid coverage for doula care. With doulas being a needed and recently covered service through Medi-Cal, California's Medicaid program, we wanted to devote an episode to talking about what doulas are and how people can access the service. Today, we are going to explore this topic with two experts in the field, Amy Chen and Tamar Sebesta. Okay, so welcome back to a Flourishing Start podcast. Today we have two amazing guests, and we'll allow them to introduce themselves today, and we'll go ahead and pass it over to Amy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Chen. I'm a senior attorney with the National Health Law Program in our Los Angeles office. I've been working at the National Health Law Program, or NHelp, for about 10 years now. And one of the projects that I lead here at NHelp is our Doula Medicaid project, which is working to help expand access to doula care, primarily for Medicaid enrollees.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tamar Sebesta. I am a rising senior. I'll be graduating this May from CSUN. I work in the entertainment industry, but I also like to give back to my community. So I do a lot of advocacy work to help young parents, former foster youth, and first-gen students, which are all a part of my own identity. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with everyone today.
Thank you both, Amy and Tamar. We're so happy to have you both here talking as experts in motherhood, Amy as an attorney for doula services, and Tamar with a wealth of lived experiences. Tamar, I wanted to kick off this conversation with you and your experiences that you've had. Can you share a little bit about your family's story from the very first moment you found out you were expecting?
Yeah, so I was in foster care when I was younger. I was reunified with my dad, and he was a single parent. And then I shortly became a single parent myself. After I lived with him for a few years, I was 15, and it was a very stressful situation for me. I didn't have a lot of support as far as our family goes. It was really just me and him, and he worked a lot. So it was a really hard time emotionally and not knowing where the future of my family would go. My son's father moved out of state right when I got pregnant. So it was literally just me, and it was very life-changing. I didn't know how I would do anything from like healthcare, food resources, because I wasn't even legally allowed to work when I got pregnant at first. So just a lot of those things, and trying to figure out how I would build a community if I was going to keep my son. And I was able to have a lot of support from my best friend and her family that I grew up with. And they were the ones who really provided me with resources and encouraged me to stay in school. So I was still able to graduate with my class on time. And I never really suffered, I would say, in that way. But if it wasn't for them, I would have never known what to do. And because I didn't have a large support system, I didn't know how to navigate my own rights within healthcare and birth and like my pregnancy. So I had a really difficult pregnancy and pregnancy journey through birth. And if I would have known of resources like a doula, it would have changed my outcome entirely, which I do believe. It definitely traumatized me from a young age, and I don't plan on having more children because of my birth experience. So I am very interested to learn more in this conversation as well.
Thanks, Tamar. I know we talked a little bit about beforehand, like your experiences with birthing. And I was just really honored for you to share that, especially like today with a larger audience, because I do know that there are many other parents that can relate to you. And not that we want them to relate to these types of pregnancies and birthing experiences, but the truth is it happens. And so I wanted to kick it over to Amy. Like, can you define for us what is a doula and what do doula services look like?
Yeah, so a doula is really a birth support person who typically provides social, emotional, and physical support both before pregnancy. I think most prominently people think about a doula as providing support during labor and delivery, and then also post-pregnancy during the postpartum period or after the end of the pregnancy. And typically, I would say doula support really varies. Doulas are not medical providers, they're not clinical providers, and so they're not licensed the way that, say, like doctors or nurses are. And so I think there's a lot of variety in terms of the types of doulas and the types of work and support that they provide. I would say here in California, one thing that is maybe relevant for a lot of the listeners is that starting January 1st, 2023, Medi-Cal, California's Medicaid program, started covering doula services. And they cover the full spectrum of doula services. So that means doula services not just for prenatal, postpartum, and the labor and delivery period, but for all the ways in which a pregnancy can end, including abortion, miscarriage, and stillbirth. And so that is a benefit which, I would say, even though that was 2023, it's still kind of in the process of rolling out. I think, we're not, I think I would say in terms of like the utilization of the benefit, I think it's still definitely growing, but there's still so many Medi-Cal enrollees that could benefit from the service and don't know about it. And there's still many doulas out there who I think would love to go into this as a career, want to train up to become a doula, and are maybe still trying to figure out what that looks like.
Now, on that same topic, so would you say doulas are a new type of service/career path, or have doulas existed for a very long time?
Yeah, so doulas, I think that the term doula has not been around forever, but the idea of like a support person or like a birth support person has sort of, I mean, I don't know about like time immemorial, but like there have in many cultures there has been a person that serves that role. Sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's just like a trusted person in the community that sort of helps provide that birth support. I would say, the term doula, and actually there's some resources on our webpage, maybe we can share like on the show about like, some of the controversy, I would say, over the use of the actual term doula. But, I would say more broadly, the idea of like the birth support worker, it's something that has existed for quite a long time. But, here in California and elsewhere, the idea of having that person provide support for you, oftentimes doulas who are being paid out of pocket, like the services can be quite expensive. So for example, I have 3 kids. I had doulas at all 3 of my births, but I had to pay out of pocket each time between $1,500 to $2,000 each time for those doula services. And so for me, at the time when I had my first 2 kids, I was actually working as a legal aid attorney in Oakland, California. And so I think after I came back from my maternity leave, I was so grateful for the help that I had from my doula, but it was so obvious to me how my clients in legal aid, many of whom were pregnant, many of whom also would have benefited from the support of a doula, couldn't afford it. It was just too expensive. And so when I came to NHelp, I really became interested in seeing how to expand access to doula care for Medi-Cal enrollees as well. So, I mean, I guess to answer your question, I think it's a career path that's been around for quite a long time. But I will say just over the past maybe about 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of interest around the country in expanding access to doula care for Medicaid enrollees. And I think that is, I think it's a really significant opportunity, honestly. And I view it as an opportunity both for like workforce development and community development, because many of the doulas that are interested in serving Medicaid enrollees are community-based doulas. So they want to be serving pregnant people in their own community. And so if you think about it, if the benefit is structured in such a way as to make doula care sustainable and for the reimbursement rates to be sustainable, then it can really be an opportunity for workforce development and really community transformation, right? If that's a sustainable and if it's paying a thriving wage, that is something that people who want to be able to come back and serve in their community can do. So, hopefully that's something that we can kind of look to doing here in California.
Now, yeah, before we kick it off to Tamar to get your thoughts around doulas a little bit more, Tamar or Amy, I wanted to figure out with you if there is one thing you wanted the general public to know about doulas, what would it be?
You know what? I would say sort of like I would say that I think doulas have, because of the type of support that they provide, it's individually tailored. It's, especially for community-based doulas, it's culturally congruent. It's very specific to their client. And so I think doulas really do have a big and significant and critical role to play in addressing some of the disparities in maternal health and maternal mortality, particularly for Black and Indigenous and BIPOC and other people of color. So I think that there's that piece, which I feel like is especially important to lift up right now because of all of the federal attacks that we're seeing against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. At the same time, I do want to just put the caveat that, like, I've heard from doulas time and time again that, like, of course, there's a lot that they can do to support pregnant and birthing people and to help address some of those disparities in maternal and infant health, but they can't do it all, right? Like, if a doula is there trying to push back against a healthcare system that has sort of individual and institutional and structural racism, they can help that client, but that racism is still there, right? So, like, I think there's still a lot of, like, broader structural changes that also need to happen alongside with expanding access to doula care.
Thank you so much for that overview too. I think I'm learning a lot about doulas and their services. For me personally, I didn't know about doulas, I would say maybe until this past year. And it just always shocks me because I would consider myself like in tune with like what is going on in the community and like what's happening to families. And I just didn't know that this was an option. So, with that being said, Tamar, when did you first hear about doulas? And now hearing from Amy a little bit more about it, how do you think? Well, actually, I'll just stop there because the next question's a little bit longer. So, when did you first hear about doulas, Tamar?
I had heard about them when I was pregnant, but I remember it was more of like oh, like they're just kind of like hippie healthcare providers. Like that was, I guess, the idea that I had. And I was like 15, so I did not know it. And, I feel like I was just constantly told, oh, you're young, you'll have an easy birth. And a lot of the people that were in my life, like they were sharing stories of like their friends that were teen parents. And I'm like, that for me, I was like, that is not encouraged. Like my goal was obviously not to be a teen parent. Like it just, like you said earlier, things just happen, and it just happened to me. So I was not very encouraged. I kind of knew everyone was full of it. And I was like, like, I feel like birth is going to be hard and it's not going to be easy. And it ended up not being, but it was very shocking of how terrible it was. And I had so many like health struggles like throughout my pregnancy and then post, and just dealing with also like, yeah, postpartum depression and like not having like a mom figure in my life because, I was taken from my mom very young. So I didn't have anyone to talk to about those things. And my dad didn't know what he was doing. It was hard as he tried. So it was just really difficult not having that support as a woman. And on top of it, how you mentioned, Amy, like, how dangerous it is to give birth in America. And I remember I heard this in one of my college classes that I took years later. Basically, how if you're a woman of color, specifically if you're a Black woman, like it's one of the most dangerous, life-threatening things to give birth in America. And I remember that changed my perspective entirely. And like my mom, she's Indigenous, and having like those genetics, I was actually at risk for a lot of health issues that I didn't realize until after. Like I ended up developing like gallstones and had to have an emergency surgery of my gallbladder, like literally 3 weeks after I gave birth. So
Oh
I
my
was like on
God.
morphine for probably 2 months after I gave birth. So I don't even really remember the first few months of my son's life because I was just on bed rest, for having a really bad birth experience, and then on top of it having surgery that was hard for me to recover from.
Mm.
So like those things, I feel like if I had someone who was aware of like cultural backgrounds and heritage, like I might have had a different experience, had
Mm.
different blood work done. I was also like at risk for like, postpartum depression, especially given my background being in like foster care and just a lot of the traumas I've had. So like no one, because I was out of the system, no one like was there to help me. I didn't have a social worker to like, give me resources for mental health and things of such. So it just felt like I could have used a doula, like looking back, I'm like, I wish I would have had one to support me through these different experiences I was having. And like I said, like I knew what they were, but I didn't know what they did. Like I heard the term doula, but no one ever explained it to me. And because I, just grew up in a family that was, didn't really have an education. Like my dad's side of the family, they were also immigrants. So they didn't really know these things. They didn't know how to work the healthcare system. Like my dad didn't even have insurance my whole childhood. I do wish I had a doula to help me work through these different life experiences and help me navigate it. And I didn't have like the proper questions to ask, which is a huge thing. I feel like something that's often overlooked with youth, especially young parents, is we don't know what to ask. And like I mentioned before, like as the first person in my family to also have like health insurance, it's just so crazy to even think about like health insurance, like which should be a basic right, but that's a whole other conversation. Like my dad didn't know what to ask, you know what I mean? And I didn't know how to support myself. And again, I did not have a social worker at this point to help navigate this space because I had already exited the system legally. So it just felt like I was thrown into this and I didn't know how to defend my rights and myself and everyone in the healthcare system that is, a licensed doctor, whatever, OB, like they were just constantly judging and so many comments that I would experience because of my age and my background and, even to my birth point, just like being forced to have birth control, which is a whole other conversation too, because I was so young. So it was just all these different like microaggressions that I feel would not have happened if I had that person to advocate for me.
Wow. I have this like dream big question for you, Tamar. How do you think the system, the healthcare system in particular, could do a better job in sharing this resources with expecting parents?
Yeah, so like I said, as someone who's had a lot of health issues, especially coming from like an at-risk community, like multiple at-risk communities, it's just like there's no information on how to access different things. And it's the same issue that we see with education, that we see with housing and all of the above. Like I didn't even know what like financial aid, like FAFSA was until I was a year in college. So it's just like people, and especially with healthcare, like I didn't even know how to access birthing classes. Like I felt like I had to fight my doctor to get that information and like how to get it covered by Medi-Cal. And like no one knows how to read those forms they send. Like I get the, Medi-Cal forms this periodically as everyone else does who has it. I'm like, I do not sit there and read that. It is like 20 pages long. I don't know what Medi-Cal RX means. Like, like I just go schedule my appointment. And if I have a copay, I have a copay. If I don't, I don't. Like it's just, I'm gonna be honest, like people, that's like reading the fine print, like no one really does that unless it's your job to do that. And they prey off that, they prey off knowing that people aren't gonna actually utilize these resources, meaning they don't have to pay for it. So it's just strategically done to impact at-risk communities. And I wish that they were just had more programs focusing on like, education and different initiatives to help people. And it's not even just for at-risk communities, like people in general, like everyone deserves to have healthcare services to the full extent, especially if you're paying all this money, and it's not there. Like I have Kaiser personally, and like they have little forms, of like healthy eating, this and that, but like it's hard to find that information, and not everyone is going to be able to utilize the internet to that full extent. Like you'd say like, oh, just Google it, but not everyone knows how to do that. They don't know how to like research for information. So I feel like something that would be great is if someone's pregnant, like they have a pamphlet or like, if you are someone who prefers it being online, like a link to resources that's given to you, so you can sort through as a part of your cohesive pregnancy plan instead of it just being like, oh, let's take some blood work, make sure, there's nothing wrong and then send you on your way. And like, I wish it was more cohesive and like a whole fitness, like a fitness plan, but for pregnancy. Like that's how I would dream big to change things.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Tamara. On this same similar notes, I did want to pass it over to Amy. Could you share with us, like, how can expectant parents go about the process of finding a doula? And what is a common barrier in accessing doulas?
Yeah, I guess I would say like at least in the Medi-Cal context, I think this is still something that is really a challenge. And I will say this because in California, many people who are pregnant on Medi-Cal are part of a Medi-Cal managed care plan. Like they're part of a health plan like Kaiser, for example, or HealthNet or Anthem. And I think the health plans have been a little bit slow to incorporate doulas. Like they were supposed to, it has been a requirement, obviously, for, a little over 2 years now. But I think because health plans were basically trying to figure out how to incorporate this brand new type of Medi-Cal provider, doulas had not previously been reimbursable by Medicaid. And so I think the health plans were, I don't know, in some ways it kind of feels like they were like each trying, like each sort of like trying to build their own thing. And I don't feel like there was a ton of coordination between them. And so I think as a result, like I will say, the access has been a challenge, right? Like the Department of Healthcare Services, our California State Medicaid agency, does have a website specifically for Medi-Cal members about the doula benefit. So it has more information about what the benefit is. And then it has actually one good thing that exists in California that does not exist in other states is we actually have a registry of all doulas across the state that have been approved by our state Medicaid agency. Now, the caveat there is that if you're in a Medicaid managed care plan, the doula that you see has to be enrolled not just with the state Medicaid agency, but also with your specific managed care plan. And so I'm pretty sure on the registry, and we can include these links with part of the show notes later. But on the registry, I think it has the name of the doula, contact information, the counties in which they work, and I think it also has the Medicaid managed care plans that they're enrolled with, if any. I think there's also some additional information there as well. Like, for example, do they speak any languages other than English? Like, do they have like any specialty services? Like some doulas, for example, maybe have some special, like maybe a specialization in working with pregnant people with SUD, for example, or like pregnant people who are like DV survivors, like that type of thing. And so I think it's great that there's that registry. People can go and kind of look it up. But, I think just like Tamar said, like you have to know that there's a registry there and you have to know which website to go to actually look up that registry. So it's sort of like still this kind of chicken or the egg kind of thing. I would say the other thing is, outside of the Medicaid context, I think a lot of people who are looking for doulas, they'll just do a Google search for the doulas that are working in their community, or in their county. And then lastly, I think a lot of people hear about doulas from word of mouth, right? It's maybe somebody that a family member or friend has used, or maybe just like other referrals that come like that. But I will say like this piece is definitely still a challenge. And even if you're able to look up maybe whatever 5 or 6 doulas that are working in your county or, available sort of like in your city or your hospital. Doulas, because of the nature of their work, they typically don't take on more than say like 3 to 4 clients, maybe 2 to 3 clients a month. And so like that doula may not even be available, right? So I think this is definitely something that has to be, definitely something that continues to be a challenge. And I think one thing that I think it would be great for the state Medicaid agency, for organizations, for like funders to look at doing is to continue to kind of really build more robust training so that we have a more robust doula workforce. I think that's definitely something that needs to happen in order to meet the needs of pregnant and birthing people in Medi-Cal. And we know, just as an aside, close to half of all births in California are financed by Medi-Cal, right? So if we could get a doula to support most of those births, like what a huge impact that could potentially have.
That's huge. I feel like I would ask you, Amy, like if you could wave a magic wand and fix one barrier, which one out of all of them would it be? But now I feel a little harsh asking you that because there's just a little bit, a lot going on of trying to get this all coordinated, get the people themselves to know about the services. And then, of course, like everything you just mentioned, it's just something that the state and the people are kind of like grappling with together at the same time. I guess I would still ask you though, Amy, like, would you choose just one barrier, or like you would say that as organizations and nonprofits that we kind of just have to, look at all the barriers right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like we'll get there eventually in terms of like the enrollment. And I think there is a lot of interest in doula care. In California, the reimbursement, like the maximum possible reimbursement rate for doula services is a little bit higher than it used to be. It's 3,100 to 3,200, depending on like the number of like appointments and visits that you have. So I think we're close to there in terms of like the reimbursement rate being a little bit more sustainable and equitable than it was. So I guess I would say it would be great if, I mean, if I were to like wave a magic wand, I guess it would be sort of like the public education piece, right? Not only that everybody knew what a doula is and how to access one, but also that medical providers and like other clinics and hospitals, they also understand what a doula is, the scope of doula work, and they are also like supportive and on board with that. Because I think that has actually been an ongoing issue. Like, we still, even though the Medicaid benefit has been active for, like I said, like 2 years now, doulas are still having trouble in some cases accompanying their clients to the hospital, especially for labor and delivery. Like they're being told like you can't come in. And there's still, I would say opposition and sometimes like outright hostility to even the presence of a doula in the clinic or the hospital. So I guess if I were to say like one thing, it would be to just sort of make what a doula is and like what they do, and for that to like an understanding that is like a positive benefit that is positive for maternal and infant health, for that to just be accepted.
Thanks, Amy. I'm gonna kick it over to Tamar again. I wanted to hear your advice. Like, if you were talking to a young parent who was expecting a child but didn't have family to rely on, one, what are some tips you would share with them to make them feel less alone? And from what you've heard so far in the conversation, would you recommend to that expecting parent to look into a doula service?
Yeah, I would say I'm a really brutally honest person because people in my life have not been honest with me. So in reality, like to a young parent like listening, you are going to have to deal with being alone. Like that's the reality. Like there is no honestly like magic thing that's going to make it feel any less hard, and it's going to be probably the hardest first few years of your life, but things do change and evolve, and as you grow and evolve yourself, you start to kind of see everything you've been through in a new light, and it shapes you and you'll be able to help someone else. And like the goal is for everyone obviously to do something to give back to their community so that it gets a little easier for the next person. And I feel like right now, like we're in a different space than we were when I was pregnant. My son actually turns 8 next week. So, I was a young mom for already a long time, it feels like, and people are gonna, not treat you the best. And that's okay. Like you have to just focus on yourself and know what's good for your family and be able to defend your family, like using your voice and not be afraid or ashamed of that. For a long time, like I had a hard time just being in public with my son alone when I was so young. I lived in a very privileged area that was primarily like white, upper middle class, and we were like the poor family, I guess, in that area. And it was really hard for me like trying to fit in even before I became a parent. So imagine when you become a parent and everyone looks at you, and I feel like for me, like that came with a lot of different challenges that maybe other people didn't face because there just weren't resources for people in my situation, because there weren't teen parents where I lived, like it was very taboo versus maybe other areas that were lower income, housing tracts, like there tend to be more, young parents, stuff like that of the sort, but there also do tend to be more resources. And something I wish that would have been accessible to me is like some of the high schools in other cities, like they actually offer childcare for young moms because there were enough young moms to do that. But where I grew up, that wasn't a problem, so I was just constantly shamed. So I feel like just don't let the shame get to you. Eventually you're going to be able to accomplish great things and have like a mindset and determination that maybe other people your age won't have, and it'll be your greatest asset. And your kids will look up to you if you do the best to heal yourself. And I always hear that too, like young parents worried, like when they're pregnant, like, oh, like I'm not healed, like I still have a lot of trauma. I'm like, everyone has trauma. Like even if you're older, like the trauma doesn't really erase. It just changes. So if you just do your best to work on yourself and, find the people that are going to help you do that, I think that's what matters the most. Like my son, he actually won an award like at a school for being the most empathetic in his class. And, that award came from me and my parenting, and despite my age. And I feel like I've even been told by adults, you know, in the workplace, like people in their 50s, like, wow, like you have such, like your perspective is challenging me. And I'm like way older than you. And I'm like, you know, sometimes those things you go through make an impact on people, you know, and like use that to make an impact, a positive impact on your family and other young parents. But it will be hard. And I would say, yeah, I totally would recommend getting a doula. Like if that's someone, if you don't have like a mom like I didn't, or like a support system to help you navigate these challenges, like if a doula will help you, especially now that it's covered financially, like you should 100% utilize that. I would, you know, if I 100% would. And, you know, asking them for advice and like going about it as like a relationship. And something that I want to highlight is it's really hard for young people sometimes to trust adults, especially when a lot of adults in our lives have been distrusting to us at a young age. It's something I definitely still struggle with. So I feel like try to go about it as like they want to help you, you know, and support you, like they're not out to get you. And you know, just do the best that you can with opening up to them and being able to get the care you need is the most important for you and your child, especially if you don't have anyone. Because if you don't build a community, it's going to be really hard to do it later, which is something that I'm struggling with now. So it's never too late, but, you know, just keep pushing.
Thanks for that advice, Tamar. This is a part in the podcast where you both can ask each other questions.
Amy, I would love to know more about what a doula does in terms of the postpartum aspect. Like, how long do they typically stay on with a client, and what are the different issues that they try to tackle, you know, or help support in a more positive light?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So again, I think it depends on the doula, but in the Medicaid context at least, you guys might know that it used to be that Medicaid, if you were on Medicaid because of pregnancy, you if at the end of the pregnancy you were no longer financially eligible for Medicaid, you would still be eligible for a postpartum period of usually about 2 to 3 months. But a couple years ago, California, along with almost all the states in the country now, expanded the Medicaid postpartum coverage to a full 12 months after the end of the pregnancy. So that means if you are on Medicaid when you if you're on Medi-Cal when you give birth, you stay on Medi-Cal for the full 12 months, and that's regardless of any changes in income. So I would say like one really positive thing that I've seen here in California and in other states too is trying to match that Medicaid doula postpartum coverage, having it align with that 12-month postpartum expansion. So I guess I can say like in the private, like sort of like in the private context or like private pay context, I think many doulas will maybe have like 2 to 3 postpartum appointments where they'll see you maybe for the first month or 2 to 3 months after the end of the pregnancy. And, you know, oftentimes, you know, those visits will be around newborn care, maybe helping. I think many doulas are also like sometimes have like dual certification as lactation consultants in some cases, especially if they're doing the postpartum care. So maybe they can help with some of the lactation. Many postpartum doulas will also provide kind of services that you can think of as like almost like a kind of like a night nurse, right? So they'll like help, you know, they'll often help like new parents overnight or like help with like bottle feeding. And then some postpartum doulas do work that is supportive, like even just like, you know, helping to clean up around the house, like sort of that kind of work. So I think it's like pretty like a real variety. I think other doulas, they'll continue to provide sort of access to resources and sort of information and referrals. So I think in the Medicaid context, it'll be interesting to see because, you know, as I said, it's only been a couple of years that we've had the Medicaid benefit, but theoretically, you know, I mentioned earlier that the reimbursement rate, if you use the full scope of services, is up to $3,100 to $3,200. That's if you use every single one of like the allocated kind of prenatal and postpartum appointments. But theoretically, you could have somebody that continues to see their doula. I'm just going to throw this out, like say once a month or like every other month until their baby turns a year old for that full 12-month period. And so especially when you think about community-based doulas, like many of those doulas who were community-based doulas were already following the families for up to a year. Like that was very typical for them. So I think it'll be interesting to see how, because in the Medicaid context, there's this alignment now with that 12 months of postpartum coverage. I think it'll be interesting to see how, for those Medi-Cal enrollees who use like that extended support during that period, like how that continues to impact them. Because I think Tamar, like even you mentioned, like a lot of the issues that come up that are related to pregnancy, those are not necessarily going to happen within the first month or like the first 6 weeks, right? We even know that a lot of the complications that come up often are happening 6, 7, even 8 months afterwards. Certainly, issues around postpartum, like depression and other issues like that, are just sort of ongoing and not just during that first period. So, I think as you said, Tamar, like having that additional person, not just to like support, but also to like kind of let hey, I know you're really worried about that, but you know what? That's actually normal. Like, you don't need to like be super anxious about that. Like, even having somebody to kind of like affirm you in that way, I think can be so powerful. Um, so, yeah, yeah. I guess a question that I have for you, and I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, which is there's like so much information that's out there. And I remember this from when I worked in legal aid, and like my clients would come in with their stack of like paperwork that they got from the Medi-Cal agency. And like it would be like a lot of them are actually notices, right? And I'm going to say, as a lawyer, that they're probably there because some lawyer told them that they had to do it, right? And so there's like, it'll be like a stack of papers, like, 2 to 3 inches thick, and nobody's going to read that. Like, not even a lawyer's going to read that. I feel like you're not expected to read that. Like, it's impossible. It's really there because of some liability, or at some point they were sued, or who knows what happened, but like they have to give it to you. And so I really empathize with that. I got all this get all this paperwork, but nobody knows what it means. And so I guess I would love to hear from you. Like, what are some other ways that, say, like this doula benefit, like what are some other ways that would be like, I guess, better ways or like more impactful ways to like reach out and share about the benefit? Like if you think back to where you were when you were pregnant, like what would have been impactful? And like, especially hearing that, like, totally understandable, like some some people or some adults, or like some whatever people like in authority positions, like you're not going to be inclined to trust them for various reasons. This is very common, especially with some BIPOC communities, immigrant communities. Like there's a lot of distrust in like the medical field. So like who would be like a trusted person that you would listen to, and like sort of like what context would be helpful, you think?
I feel like that's definitely a hard question. um, I don't know. I mean, I feel like honestly an entirely different person from when I was 15. I'm turning 24 this year, so that was almost 10 years ago. But to be completely honest, I just was kind of in my own world. I think I would have listened best by just people in person. I'm still that way. Like I need to be in person to form a connection. I'm not, I guess, a typical Gen Z. I'm online, but I'm not like chronically online like that. So I would say to just have better like trained healthcare professionals that like I feel like I could trust. I just didn't have that because of their bias against young parents, which was just really uncalled for. I think changing like the healthcare community, like their training would be best. That's probably what would have helped me. And because at the end of the day, I did want like an adult to like love me. That was like reality of the situation. I just didn't feel that anywhere. So I feel like they need to get more training on like empathy and working with people of different backgrounds. I have a lot of friends who like are aspiring to work in the healthcare community and do already. And they always share how like a lot of people that work in that space are just really drained, and just, in it for the money, in it for the wrong reasons. And also just kind of lose empathy over time because of like desensitization, like when you're working with people dying all the time, like eventually you're going to get desensitized. So honestly, like fixing the healthcare system by fixing their training, giving them therapy, maybe mandatory, to talk about these things. It's a really hard job to have. And also just changing the mindset, because it might just be honestly a generational thing. You know, it might not change until like honestly like my generation takes, you know, becomes healthcare professionals, if I'm being honest, because a lot of people are also stuck in their ways and there's nothing you can do about that. But I think that's what would have helped me the best, instead of just having people assume, you know, like different things about like my family or like what I would do with my life. Like I ended up being on paper at least more successful than a lot of my peers, and I had a kid at 15. So I think like, you know, but back then I was just told like, oh, like, you know, you're not gonna be able to go to school or do this and that, which didn't is not true. You know, I did all those things plus some and then some, and you know, did it in areas in my life that most people don't even dream of getting, you know, and I ended up being able to do it. So I think just like if I would have had different conversations in the office, I wouldn't have felt like I couldn't trust them in the first place. And I think a fear that needs to be like fixed too is a lot of former foster youth that I've worked with, because I do work with a lot of people who, you know, aged out of the system and were just in it longer than me. And they always, and I feel the same way, but they talk about how once you get pregnant, it feels hard to trust people, you know, that are certified, because you feel like, oh, your kid's gonna get taken away for whatever reason, even if you're like the best parent ever. And it's just like a constant, like, you know, so like when my kid would get sick, like I would be, you know, when he was a baby, like I just never wanted to take him in because I'm like, oh, they're gonna blame me, you know, because I'm young and 15 and like I don't know what I'm doing. But like, yeah, having a doula to be like, no, that's normal. Like babies get sick, you know, like it's a child, like children are gonna get sick, like that's not on you, you know, you didn't do anything wrong. Like that kind of confirmation would have been really beneficial. Or, you know, or having the healthcare professional, like, you know, yeah, confirm that like these are normal things that can happen, instead of just like being rude completely and biased. That would have made me definitely less nervous. And also just, yeah, having the support of like caring for a newborn. It can be really challenging, like knowing what to do, and that needs to change, you know. So having like, yeah, maybe email, what's it called, like not mailing list, you know, what's it called, like an email campaign, you know, where they send out like a roundup of like all the information. I feel like that would have been great, you know, too, like for at home care, like, oh, these are the things that like your baby might be feeling like months 0 to 3 or this and that, or like these are the illnesses that can happen, instead of like trusting like WebMD to like diagnose your child. Like I feel like, you know, that would have been helpful. And I remember, just as a fun story to end this question, my son got like hand, foot, mouth, you know, from his daycare. And I thought, like, you know, and I'm a very clean, like a clean freak. Like I get really grossed out. I've had to work on it. You know, being a mom, like now I'm definitely not as as a freak as I was when I was younger. But like it freaked me out so bad, and I was so disgusted. And I remember thinking like, this is the grossest thing ever. Like ew. And I like deep cleaned my house for like a week after, like bleaching every corner, because I thought it was just so foul. And I found out it was literally like a very common thing that kids can get from like daycare. Like even if, and my son went to an amazing childcare center, amazing. They had like a farm and goats and everything. And I know it was great. Like that's another resource too. Like college campuses, they offer free childcare, and usually they're amazing programs because it's on a college campus, so they get the same funding, you know, as the students do. So he had a great experience there. But even the best daycare, you know, like you can still get like those things. So I wish I just knew that, you know, it was a very common thing, and my son would not die and I would not get it. But it was super gross. So like I wish those things were normalized. And I feel like a lot of parents don't talk about the gross stuff, you know, or like the things because they feel like they'll be shamed or this or that. It's like lice, you know, like people are so weird. Luckily, we've never had it, but people are so weird about lice outbreaks, you know, with kids. And it's like very like taboo to talk about it. But yeah, I wish I would have known that like putting rosemary in a shampoo bottle could prevent it, things like that. So yeah, like kind of breaking the taboo conversations of things that would actually happen, instead of just talking about like the worst of the worst. Like I feel like healthcare professionals will jump to like, oh, like if your kid watches too much TV, like then they're gonna become, you know, they're gonna be on the spectrum. I'm like, that's insane. Like, you know, like they jump like to that, like, and then you're constantly worried, you know. At least I was, like, my son is screen free, but I do let him watch movies, which is I kind of have to because I work in movies. But like I always would worry, you know, like, oh, like if he watches it for like a second too long, he's gonna end up having all these struggles with his education later. I'm like, that's just extreme. So I feel like I wish we talked about the things that are more likely to happen on the day to day, you know, instead of just jumping to like the conclusions and having anxiety for like months. That, yeah, I'm gonna end there.
Can I just say, all 3 of my kids have had hand, foot, mouth, and I have had it twice.
Oh, it's so gross. It's the worst.
It's not pleasant.
Especially it hurts too, which is something they don't talk about too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My son was crying, because they get on their feet, like everywhere that's like sensitive and you have to walk and like tap things. It was so sad too, But
It's
yeah,
really
they don't talk about any of that.
I know.
So
This kind of reminds me of something that you were talking about earlier, Tamar, where like people like I feel like since becoming a parent, I feel like parents are like the most judgy people
they are.
ever. You know what I mean? And so like just give them something else to judge about, right? Oh, you're young, like I'm gonna judge that. Oh, like you're letting your child watch. My kids watch so much like TV and like some like, oh, you're letting your child play that video game that's not age appropriate. Oh, like I'm gonna judge that. Just give them an excuse, right? And parents will judge. So
Yeah, that's what I mean too. I do want to add that too. Last thing, I promise, 'cause that's a really good point that I would love a young parent to know. Like, yeah, like for me, like I never made young mom friends again because I was like 15, so no one was having kids at 15. Like like I had friends, but it was really hard, balancing both. But I would say like as I got older, I always thought, oh, I'll make mom friends like once my kid's in school. Like never happened. And it's the thing is, it's gonna be so hard to like find people that support you. And that's okay. But like, yeah, mom friends are the worst. Honestly, like I've tried. It's just everyone's so judgy and like, especially if you are, I'd say like a working mom or like someone who's going to school, like a lot of women are not supporting women. Like everyone says we are, but we're not, like they'll just judge you. Like you're either working too much or you're a stay-at-home mom and don't have any purpose. Like there's no balance and it's really frustrating. So yeah, I wish honestly parents would change too and start supporting each other through these hardships. And having like pregnancy classes, together parenting classes like that aren't taboo, like just to like form a community instead of just being like, I don't know, completely stuck in your own world. That would be the dream because I've had the same experience.
Yeah. Well, on that note, y'all, thank y'all for joining this conversation that I wish is more talked about motherhood, parenthood, doula services, young parent experiences. I think all these topics fit very well together, and I'm very honored to have both of you as experts on this episode. But with that, thank you for watching today's episodes. We'll have resources in the show notes for you all, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you for joining us today on our podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the National Center for Youth Law. To suggest a podcast topic or to express interest in being a podcast guest, please email health@youthlaw.org.